Religion has been Satan's greatest counterfeit to true spirituality. Religion has done more damage to the church than all the atheists, communists, and world-class sinners combined. Do you agree with that? I do. I do. See, I don't know about you. I wasn't saved in a church. I mean, some of you were. I've met a lot of people who've been turned off by the church. Seriously, I came to Christ reading the Bible. Reading the Bible, reading the Scriptures. I came to Christ, and when I went to church, it's always been hard for me in church because I had an idealistic expectation as what to expect from church, because my perceptions of what church was based on my perceptions of what the Bible said. And I got to church, I'd say, this doesn't look like what Paul's talking about. This isn't what looks like what Jesus is talking about. What is this? Because we become so institutionalized, so ingrained, and we get these appearances. Well, they had the same problem in the time period of Paul. C.S. Lewis says something very similar to this. If the divine call doesn't make us better, it will make us very much worse. Of all bad men, religious bad men are the worst. Religious bad men are the worst. Of all created beings, the wickedness is the one who originally stood in the immediate presence of God. Think about it. Adam. Everything. He was in the presence of God. I often used to think, oh God, if you just come and talk to me. Oh God, if I could just hear your voice and you'd stand before me, I would know. And then I look at the garden, and there stands Adam. And you know something? I'm not so sure I'd be any different from Adam. Religiosity is dangerous. Religiosity is dangerous. Churchiness is dangerous. Paul knows it very well. He knows it because of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He knows of the religion of the Jews. It became too institutionalized, too on the face, on the surface. Jesus knew about it. He spoke directly into the face of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees and of the religiosity of the day. I don't like to play church. I'm not here to play church. We're going to watch a film clip, The Adjustment Bureau. I don't know if you ever saw this video or this film. In the next clip, Congressman David Norris gives an impromptu speech on authenticity, or lack therefore of, in politics. But what we're going to see, apply it to religiosity. Matt Damon's in this video. He's
I grew up not far away from here in Red Hook. I love you both. But we had a rule in my neighborhood. When you got in a fight, it wasn't whether or not you got knocked down. It's what you do when you get back up. And I came here to tell you tonight that I will get back up. We didn't have that saying in my neighborhood. It's just one of those phrases that it had some traction with the focus group, and so we kept using it, but it's not true. In 1998, I did a cover story for GQ. The title was Youngest Congressman Ever. And since then, every story has tried to explain how I got here so fast. And the word that people kept using was authentic. But here's the problem. This isn't even my tie.
Go get Jim for me.
This tie was selected for me by a group of specialists in Tenafly, New Jersey, who chose it over 56 other ties we tested. In fact, our data suggests that I have to stick to either a tie that is red or a tie that is blue. A yellow tie made it look as if I was taking my situation lightly, and I may in fact pull my pants down again at any moment. A silver tie meant that I'd forgotten my roots. My shoes. You know, shiny shoes we associate with high-priced lawyers and bankers. If you want to get a working man's vote, you need to scuff up your shoes a little bit, but you can't scuff them up so much that you alienate the lawyers and the bankers, because you need them to pay for the specialist back in Tenafly. So what is the proper scuffing amount? Do you know we actually paid a consultant $7,300. Was it $7,300, Charlie? $7,300 for a consultant to tell us that this is the perfect amount of stuffing.
People may be fooled by phoniness. God's not fooled by phoniness. Politicians play this game. They stand before you with, got to look good, got to look right. And they have these committees around them to make them just look just right. Say the right words for the audience and the people so that they'll believe it. Religion's no different. Religion's no different. People will stand up in front of you in a church and they'll say what you want to hear. You give to the church, God's going to bless you. Going to bless you with all the rewards in heaven if you just do this and this. You know what I call that? I call that manipulation of people. You dress a certain way, you come into church, and you dress a certain way that people will, look, he's dressed in a nice suit, or he reaches out to a certain group of people, or he dresses down like this. So the common man. I don't want to manipulate people. I don't want to play games. I don't want to play church. You come to church sometimes and you know what you're putting on your face is not what's at home. It's not there. Now, God's not impressed. God's not impressed with a politician who impresses everybody else. You can impress the people, but you can't impress God. He isn't fooled by those who know and teach from behind a religious mask. Say the right words. I tell you, there's preachers that'll stand up here and say everything they think that people want to hear, and it's all theologically correct and everything, but in reality, they don't believe half of it. Or they believe differently than what they know what the congregation wants to hear. And sometimes you think, gee, he's got his act together, he knows it, and he is so certain of what he says, but in reality, he has just as many doubts and not too sure of himself. He's got the appearance of being sure of himself. If only for a moment the people think, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about religion. I don't know what I'm talking about. I read the Scriptures. I try to understand the Scriptures. I try to understand God through the Scriptures. But I don't talk with God any better than you do. God doesn't talk into my ear any more than He talks into your ear. And for somebody to stand before you and tell you that, I heard God say, truth of the matter is, well, maybe. That's pretty rare. There are no modern day prophets, not really. And those that go around saying they are, most of them are liars. God isn't fooled by those that hide behind their religious affiliations. Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist. Got it closed in a box. I know what the Methodists believe. I'm a Methodist. We know what we're, something. They got some things together that's right, and they don't have some things together that's right. And Baptists are the same way, and Presbyterians are the same way, and Reformed Church. And there's denomination after denomination. Most of the time it's over some disagreement. We disagree over some stupid, petty little thing. Usually it's a personality issue, so we go start a new denomination. And we hide behind that denomination. God's not impressed. You know, there are no Baptists in heaven. There are no Presbyterians in heaven. There are no Catholics in heaven. You know what it is? There's children of God in heaven. People who believe in His Son, trusted in Him. Period. I might offend somebody today. I hope not. But I don't care. I don't care. Overview. The overall purpose of Romans 1 through 3, we're going to get to the text today, is to level humankind under sin. This is what Paul's doing. He's saying, you're all sinners. We're all sinners. We're all under the same roof. We've all been covered by the stain of sin. We're all under Adam. There's no exceptions. Paul, I love his argument and the way he goes into Romans. Paul begins with Gentiles who are guilty of blatant disobedience, 1:18 through 32. He says, they had general revelation, they knew better, they did it, they're sinners. And I can hear all the Jews going, yeah, man, them Gentiles are sinners. They're horrible, look at them. They're blatant. They're involved in idolatry, and they're involved in all this promiscuity, and they're going to the temples in Corinth and mixing with prostitutes, and they drink too much, and they all this. And Paul lays it out and says they're all guilty. All these Gentiles. He's speaking as a Jew, probably about the Gentiles. And then he hits the moralist right in the face in chapter 2. Then he pronounces the moralist guilty of counterfeit obedience. You legalist. You who, looking at the Gentiles, you who know that they're in the wrong, you know what? You do the same thing, so don't give it be that bull. You're just as guilty as they are. You are just as guilty as they are, so back off the Gentiles. You know, Paul is a Jew. He was a Pharisee. He was in this camp. You know what I love about comedians? If I stood up here right now and I started making jokes about African Americans, or if I started making jokes about Jews, or if I started making jokes about Polish people, that would be really politically incorrect. But I can make all the jokes I want about white Anglo men because I'm a white Anglo man. I love to watch a comedian, like a black comedian, stand up and say things about blacks, and everybody's laughing and roaring. It's okay because, you know what? He's speaking to his own people. He's one of them. He can do that. Or a Mexican laugh at some of the things about Mexicans. But if I stood up there and did that, that would be prejudicial. That would be wrong. They can do that. That's what Paul's doing here. He levels it out on the Gentiles in a sense, talking as if he's a Jew about the Gentiles, and he's laying it out on them, and all the Jews are sitting there going, yeah. And then he turns around, you know, I'm a Jew, and I'm going to tell you face point. You're no different than they are. In fact, you're worse. You're worse. You know why? They had general revelation. You have the law. God's given you something special. And with all that, you do the same things. You do the same things. This next section we're going to look at today in 2:17 through 29, he's going to name them out specifically as Jews, and he's going to talk specifically to the teachers of the law, to those who are in a position of instruction. To me, it would be me, and I can do this. I can talk pastors right in the face. You know why? I'm a pastor. I can stand here and make all the jokes in the world about pastors if I want and be sarcastic about them because I'm one of them. And you know what? I've probably done everything that they've done. I played all the religious games. Paul, a Hebrew of Hebrews, goes after his own people, the Jews, and demonstrates that even the Jew is a sinner who stands guilty before God. Now here's the problem. Now the Gentiles who are reading this see this, and they look at them Jews. And then you got anti-Semitism. And people all of a sudden hating Jews. That's not Paul's purpose here. He's just focusing in on his own group. What he's really doing is saying, you're all guilty. You're all guilty. That's what he's really going to get into in chapter 3. Inauthentic religion teaches, preaches, and gives a good appearance. You're walking to church and you just know it's phony. You walk into church and there's this phony meet you at the door, and that's a good thing, and everybody warm, but sometimes you know it's just a put on. It's not real. Or you walk into a church and it's totally cold and they don't pay any attention to you, but everybody's walking around. I'm holier than thou. Or when the individuals are in church, they just seem so pure and so holy, but then you meet them in their house or you meet them in their business. It's not applicable there. That's a whole different group of people. Be real. I hope that what you see me around here is me, that I don't put any phony appearances with you. I don't stand here speaking in some kind of a preacher's voice. That turns me off. You got this one voice, but you stand in the pulpit, and all of a sudden you got this, you've heard it. Thou art holy, brothers and sisters. Come on. Be real. Do you talk like that? Paul states it. But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law, you've got the law. You boast in God. This is good. You got something nobody else does. You got a relationship with God nobody else had. Why do you have that relationship? Because I made promises to Abraham. I made promises to Moses. I gave you something very special. I gave you the law. You should be able to boast in that and know His will. You know the will better than they do out there, the Gentiles. You've got it. You know what is excellent. He's written it out to you. This is what I don't like. This is what I do like. You know it. Because you are instructed from the law. And if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. Do you realize what you've got here? For the Jews, they had the law. For you, you got the whole Bible. You got more than they got. Do you realize that? They had the code of the law. We have all the records of Jesus Christ. The forgiveness of sin by grace through faith. We've got all that. You boast in that? You should boast in God over that. You're special. You've been chosen out. You are a special, unique people. These were a special, unique people. But notice what Paul says. You got all this. Verse 21. You then who teach others, do you teach yourself? You who teach others, do you teach yourself? Oh my. I could list, and I'm not going to list individuals by name, but I could list you preachers after preachers after preachers after preachers who have stood in the pulpit, spoken against adultery, spoken against pornography, spoken against drunkenness, spoken against all these different things, and then guess what? They're caught doing it. They're caught doing it. What a scandal. What does that say? Well, gee, preacher, you can't do it. Why would you expect us to be able to do that? The truth is, we can't do it. I can't do it. Oh, I'm not a drunkard, and I don't commit adultery. My wife would beat me over the head and kill me, because I love God, I don't do those things. But man, I fall hard. Boy, I always pick on her. She's gonna nail me in the side of the head with a frying pan one day just for that. She never does that. She loves me. She puts up with me. You guys are so fortunate. Your husband's not the pastor of the church that picks on you all the time. But just think of this for a minute. Inauthentic religion likes the rules to apply to others, but not for themselves. Let's keep everybody under the code of the law. Let's keep them under the rules of the church. But you know, I'm the teacher. These don't apply to me. Really? Really? I worry sometimes. Do I stand up to the very things that I teach? Do I really believe what I teach? Well, you preach against stealing, he tells them. He goes on. You preach against stealing. Do you steal? Well, you don't have to look at the preacher on that. You look at yourself. You preach these things to your own kids. Is it any different? You say, you shouldn't steal. Stealing is wrong. But do you steal? You tell your children, don't lie, but do you lie? Well, here it's harder. You know why? Because I've got all of you. You know, we got, in this church, believe it, we got well over 100 people, especially when you count the children involved. And I do children's chapels, and I do that. And I tell them, these things are wrong. But then I have to look at myself. Do I do them? And you know what? We rationalize the little sins. We rationalize. Well, I just cheated a little bit on my income tax. Just a little bit. You know, I said I gave a bigger contribution to the church than I really did, you know, or something along that line. Just a little. It's not a big sin. But you're out teaching that it's wrong, so you know it's wrong. You say, one must not commit adultery. Do you commit adultery? And he's talking to the Pharisees. He's talking to the Sadducees. He's talking about the legalists of the law. Do you do these things? I don't think all of them did it. I don't think it's just like us. When I say this, I can have a whole room full of pastors, and you know what? 80-90% of them probably don't do these things, but 5-10% do. But the problem is, it labels all. It labels all. You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You know what? I don't know what he's talking about here. I tried to look it up. I looked at all the commentaries. I'm not sure what these guys are doing. I don't know if they're taking the silver and gold off the idols or something, stripping them, or doing something in that law. Somebody's bringing something to them and saying, we've decided we don't believe in idols, and then they make profit off the idols. That's what I'm assuming is going on here. But we're not really sure what Paul's talking about. Not absolutely. There's all kinds of theories on this. But they're doing something that he thinks is wrong and contrary to the law. You who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the law. For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. The name of God is blasphemed among non-believers because of us. Oh, why? What? Christopher Hitchens wrote a book. I don't recommend you read it. You can if you want, if you can deal with it. He wrote a book about religion is poison. He's an atheist. He traces history and shows all the inequities and the wrong of religion, especially Christianity. And you know, over 90% of it, he's right. He's right. We were involved in the Crusades. We were involved in all these atrocities. You've got religious wars going on in Ireland. All these things, he's right. We're not practicing what we teach. Hitchens, I don't think, represents them properly. He doesn't come out and show all the good things, like go through the name of almost every hospital. Check the name of them in your own city, in the cities of the world, usually Presbyterian or Baptist, or usually some church affiliation that created all the great hospitals, or the universities, all by religion, Christianity, usually to provide for pulpits and a ministry. Wonderful. So you need to have a balanced view on these things. But the problem is, Mahatma Gandhi said, I would have been a Christian if it hadn't been for the Christians that I've known. Really? Mahatma Gandhi read the whole Gospels. He read the whole Scriptures. He believed in the Sermon on the Mount, thought that was wonderful. But he didn't see Christians practicing it. Now, he understood the Christian consciousness because he couldn't have done what he did in India unless he understood the British had a Christian conscience, because when the same type of thing was tried in Tiananmen Square in China, who weren't with Christian conscience, it didn't work. So he understood. But is the biggest thing keeping people from coming to Christ? Not that I'm not sharing Christ, but because I'm not behaving as if I belong to Christ? Paul is speaking to the Jews, and this is the circumstances he's speaking to them. If you'd live under the law, if you could do it and you practiced it, maybe it'd be different. Inauthentic religion believes that being associated with religious people like themselves gives privileges. And this is where he goes on this. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. In other words, he's telling the Jews, you're circumcised. You know what that is. This is an outward sign that you're a Jew, that you have special privileges. You're a child of Abraham. It means that you're under the code of Moses, and there are special... God does look down, and he does see that. But, really, that's a symbol to, not God, it's a symbol to people. I associate myself with the Jews. And he said, God's not impressed. I could have walked up here today and had this big cross hanging off of my chest and walking around with a big Bible under my arm and say, I'm a Christian, look at me. And everybody looks at me and says, look at him, he's a Christian. He's carrying a big Bible. He's got this gigantic cross on his chest. Or I could walk around with a collar, as a priest and look the part. I'm associated with, they're the big group, within Christianity. Or go to a pastor's conference and walk around with all the pastors. Or we go to the Baptist church because they're more holy than the Methodist church down the street. And by association, I'm just associated with the Baptists, so we got to be better than they are down there, or the Christian church up on the hill, or the Foursquare church, or I could go on and on and on and on and on and on. Doesn't do it, folks. That's what Paul's saying. If you behave as if you're not circumcised, what do you think the big deal is? I could walk around with a big cross and big Bible around all the time and look at me, I'm a Christian. That don't make me a Christian any more than there's an old saying, sitting in a garage makes me a car, It just doesn't do it. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Abraham wasn't circumcised at first. The promise to Abraham was made before he was circumcised. Paul goes into great detail in Romans over that. What made Abraham special wasn't his circumcision. It was special. God gave him that as a sign of what he was supposed to be, and for all those under him. Walking around with the name Christian doesn't make you a Christian. Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you, who have the written code and circumcision that breaks the law. In other words, they're better than you. You know what? They don't have the code of the law, and yet within the context of their heart, they understand the code of the law, and they do it. And you know what? God will look at you and say, you say the code is too hard. They're doing it. And they don't even know the code of the law. That condemns you. I've met some very godly, unchristian people. I really have. Have a strong moral fabric, a strong moral code. Authentic religion is not just written on paper, but written on one's heart. This is what Paul's getting at here. Authentic spirituality is not something one wears, but something one is. Something one is. I'm glad you're coming to this church. I'm glad you say, I'm a Baptist. I'm glad you associate with us. I'm glad you say, I go to Sunrise Baptist Church. I'm glad all that. I'm glad you call yourself a Christian. I'm glad. I'm glad. But is it written on your heart? Is it written on your heart? That doesn't happen by having it on paper or whatever. Read this. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly. Just because you walk around and say you're a Jew don't make you a Jew. Just because you walk around and you wear all the clothing of a Jew, or you wear the long locks, if you go to New York and you walk in the Orthodox community. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit. And I think this is where it comes in. A legalistic Christian writes out this code of ethics. Don't do, don't do, don't do, don't do, don't do. Usually, it involves things that aren't even in the Scripture. Like, if you've been to a legalistic, don't mix bathe. What is that? That was one I heard. What's mixed bathing? It means girls and boys going swimming together. How can you be a Christian and do that? Or, you should never have a drink. The Bible doesn't say that. I'm not encouraging drinking. Some of you should never touch a drink. Don't get me wrong. You should never touch it. But that's not what makes you a Christian. Don't smoke, or don't do this, and don't do this, and don't do this. And we come up with this long list of don'ts, and that's what makes you a Christian. It has nothing to do with it. The Jews had all that. Don't break the Sabbath. And they had this whole list of things. Don't do these things on the Sabbath. It was almost impossible for anyone to do it. You couldn't even, if you're lame, you couldn't even pick up your mat and walk with it on the Sabbath. You're supposed to leave it laying there. And you weren't supposed to walk too far away on the Sabbath. You couldn't do that. And Jesus said, Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. We lose the grace and the graciousness and the wonder. The law was a good thing. But it's an issue of the Spirit. What is the Spirit? The Spirit, all of a sudden you see Jesus Christ on the cross, and all of a sudden all the penalties of the law and all that happened to mankind and all the guilt of mankind is laid on his shoulder, and you bow your head before God and before the cross, and you say, you took it all from me. And you know what? The Spirit of God comes into your heart. And it's not a circumcision of the flesh. It's not wearing this really cool cross on your chest or carrying that big Bible on you. There's something that is done inside here. Paul uses the word metamorphosis. You've been metamorphosized in Romans 12. You've been transformed. And it's not something done on paper. It's having it written in your heart. What about you? But a Jew is one inwardly. And circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. Not by the letter. It's not that the letter's not good. It's just you're not going to make it based on that. His praise is not from man, but from God. What was the Pharisee doing? What was the scribe doing? I am a teacher of the law. Look at me. Who's he impressing? People. Who am I trying to impress by? I saw this a lot with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, kids who would walk on campus carrying their Bible. They were bold in Christ, but sometimes their behavior wasn't consistent with carrying that Bible. They were trying to make a profession and let people know they were Christians, and that was a good thing. But carrying that big Bible isn't what made him a Christian. It was making a difference by being inwardly different. A gentleness. A kindness. Being slow to anger. All those things Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Not having a list of offenses on people. I want God to look down on me and say, because He can see everything. And yes, I fall down, and I say, God, I'm so sorry. He says, I can see your heart. I know you really messed up on this one, David. You slipped. But because of the sincerity of your heart, and because you love me, and because you love my son, you're forgiven. You're forgiven. The problem with man, we can make it look good, just like our Matt Damon did, but knowing inwardly, it's all an act. It's all an act. I don't want you to be playing a game. I don't want you to be playing church. I don't want you to be on the appearance holy. You know what I call that? There's a name for that. Spiritual. There's a difference between being spiritual and being spiritual. I'm so spiritual. Look at me. Really? Really? Spirituality is having Jesus Christ in your heart. Are you there? Are you there? None of us are completely. This is what Paul's going to say in the next chapter. He's going to lay it out for you. Stop pointing your fingers at others. It's no different from Paul in the law when he says, or when Paul says about being careful how you judge. Judge not lest you be judged, because by how you judge others is the way you're going to be judged. You're condemning yourself. He's not saying you don't recognize what bad people are doing, but take a good look at yourself first before you go and take this speck out of your brother's eye. Take the beam out of your own, because not until you can get that big old beam out of it can you even look in your brother's eye to pull that speck out. It's not saying you shouldn't help your brother take the speck out of his eye. It's saying evaluate yourself first to make sure that you're not doing the same thing. And that's exactly what Paul is speaking against here. What about you? Paul spoke to the Jews that hid their lack of spirituality behind their religion. They were more religious than spiritual. What about us? What about us? Easy to look at this passage and point fingers at the Jews, but Paul was really speaking to his own. I'm speaking to my own. I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking to me. You look at your heart today. As they come up and y'all have a final song for us today? I don't know what's going on. As they come up and get ready to sing, I'll say a prayer. Maybe you haven't trusted Jesus as your Savior. Maybe you think you're a Christian because you do the right things. It's not about doing the right things or the moral code, because the standard is so high you can't do it. Jesus Christ is the standard. Are you Jesus Christ? Are you able to live the way exactly Jesus Christ? The answer is no.